Hi there, my name is Newo, and I'm a techno producer from Los Angeles. Now today I'll be doing a tutorial on my track Yellow 5, which is part of my new release Techno Mixtape 2 that came out in October. And for sake of example, I have the master loaded here, but I'll just play a little bit of it so we can get an idea of what we're doing today. Now, there were a few inspirations for this track. One of them would be Deadmau5, and I'll kind of get to that in a second because it relates to how I did the kick drum. But another influence, I'm really into minimal techno, and I go to a lot of warehouse parties here in Los Angeles, and so this track I wanted to create somewhat of a blend between that warehouse sound, but also that stripped down minimal sound. And the way I did that was really by keeping the drums very simple and allowing the lead bass to do really all the talking. So think of the lead bass in this as like, the main character in the film, and everything else is a supporting actor. And regarding the kick drum, let's go ahead and expand upon that real quick. So you'll notice here it says high-low remix kick. And I got this kick drum from, I had done a remix earlier in the year for a contest. I didn't win, but I still won in the sense of, I learned a lot. So as long as you're learning, you're winning, right? And the kick drum, it was something I had mixed analog, and I just really liked how it sounded when I was in the studio. So I printed it out off the console and saved it for, in a folder for future use, and here we are. And the kick drum also, it's about an eighth note. And that's why I mentioned Deadmau5 earlier, because Deadmau5 is someone who says that your kick drum really should be around an eighth note, or at least just very punchy, because you want to have enough room for those low frequencies to breathe. Especially on techno, when there's a lot of syncopation in the low frequencies. If you have a kick drum that's really boomy, like a long 808, such as right here, it's not going to allow anything else to punch. So let's just listen to the kick drum real quick. So it has that very, techno-oriented, warehouse-oriented punch to it. It's not extremely. It's kind of in your face, but it's also not like a hard style kick in the sense of like it's not crazy distorted. So that kick drum is playing alongside some toms, and it's also playing alongside a sub channel, and the sub on this is just a sine wave that was rendered out to sit in the same frequency range as the kick drum. And the toms on here, I won't expand too much on them, but basically these first parts are some layers for tom 1, and those are taking up more of the mid range. Tom 2 is taking up the low mid range, and then the sub is just purely taking up those frequencies that, on like laptop speakers you're not going to hear. The way I did get the sub to cut through the mix a little more, though, was by using a guitar pedal and running distortion in parallel with that. So the guitar pedal, I ran it through, it's probably, I think it's only at like 10% or something like that. But there's a couple parts here on this record where the arrangement and the sound design is all, what you're seeing here is what it is. But in terms of the mix, like a little bit of the distortion, and there's some things that were done on analog that I can't necessarily show you, but that's also part of the secret to my sound, is I can't necessarily show you everything. But I will say that the analog equipment I'm using, it's something that I just really try and as much as I can mix on a console, because it allows things to glue together and breathe just that much more. So those are playing alongside a clap, which also has a reverse sort of like white noise effect going on, which brings like a sweeping effect to the clap. So let's go ahead and listen to all of these real quick. So that sub is creating that rolling feeling alongside those toms. And when I do drums like this, and really when I'm doing bass design as well, I often on my master channel will put like a low pass filter at around 150 or 200 hertz to get a sense of what it would sound like if you're standing outside the club or if you're standing outside the warehouse, and to make sure that the bass is not muddy, that the bass itself, the sub itself, has rhythm and is bouncing. Now, regarding the drums, there's a snare that comes in on the backbeat, but the snare every once in a while is sending to a reverb, which is almost like a slapback delay. And my intention with that is I'm really into drums that are mostly mono, but then every once in a while something that's like extremely stereo comes in. And it's just a way to add variation and keep the listener engaged. And another way I did that was by adding this glitch. And the glitch comes from a previous scrapped version of the bass that I had then trimmed down to only like a second. And I placed it kind of like a rim shot. And so that's just one more element that brings a little more variation. Regarding the hi-hats, even though there's a lot of hi-hat channels, when I mixed this record down, I summed them all to one because they're all filling in that wall of sound, so to speak. So each hi-hat has like a slightly different tone to it, but they're coming in at the same spot. So what you end up with is something like this. But as you can see, I mean, it's really simple. When you're making techno, especially minimal, less is more. You don't really need to go too crazy, especially if your bass is doing all the talking. And speaking of that, let's go ahead and dive into that bass. So the bass on here is something that was designed using a sine wave as the initial source. And that sounds like this. You'll notice it's coming through on the left side, and the reason it's doing that is because I started out with a mono channel, and then I threw this wider plugin on it to make it stereo. So let's just leave that on. The wider plugin, sometimes at 200% at full, it sounds nice, but sometimes there's also a sweet spot. So I just kind of messed around with it when I was designing this, and I found that 140-ish% was a nice place to keep it at. So from that sine wave, which, by the way, the sine wave is something I use alongside an analyzer with the kick drum to make sure that everything is harmonically communicating. That sine wave then goes into a distortion pedal, which really just squares it. And, oh, you know what? Well, you're hearing a little bit of the filter freak on the breakdown, but I'll get to that. Yeah, so that square wave is something that, even though I could start by printing a square wave, I like to use this specific plugin because through trial and error, it just has the best tone that you can use as a starting point. So then from there, pretty much all of the movement is coming from this filter freak plugin. And you'll notice here it says stepped rhythm, and that was the preset I started with. But think of presets as just that, a starting point. It's not necessarily something that you should just always rock with. I mean, presets, they do exist for a reason. Like sometimes they're really helpful and you don't even need to tweak anything. But in this instance, there's a lot of tweaking going on. And what that's doing is it's the frequency here is modulating. So that was something I drew in real time as I was listening to the drums that I had designed. And every once in a while, it goes like super nuts. And so Pro Tools with the automation, it's very easy to copy and paste certain automation that you've drawn in and place that in another segment. So I kind of started, I got a groove down by drawing that in real time, and then I pasted that. And then from there, I added some tweaks that I just manually drew in. Such as right here where it goes high and then it dips down. And then on the breakdown, it essentially goes back to what it starts with, because it starts out as just that. It starts out as just that tone, and then you'll see it sweeps in. So it kind of returns to what it had started with, and then it changes again. And automation is something that goes hand in hand with arrangements, because you want to have your sound um, develop in a way that is familiar to the listener, so that like when that automation comes in, it just starts turning into a different version of the same sound. So it doesn't, you don't want to like throw off the listener by having the sound change into something completely different. It really should just morph. And especially with techno, people really connect with those sort of like melting, alien sounding bass lines. Um, and that's where Filter Freak really shines, is like the distortion on it and the resonance and the filters and all that. It just yields like such techno leaning results already. Um, and so that Filter Freak is going into the Tokyo Dawn Nova, which is really just a multi-band compressor. And so I have it cut off at around 50 hertz, so that the kick and the sub and the toms have room to take up that territory. Because if you don't high pass your lead bass, you're just gonna eat into frequency that is not, it doesn't need to be in. Like, you want to have the kick and the sub, that's really your foundation. And so the kick drum, um, it's also, because the bass is at the same frequency, like it doesn't really matter if you don't have those low frequencies in, because it's gonna fill in that range. So the Tokyo Nova, it's cutting, but it's also compressing a little bit. And part of the reason it's compressing is because those low frequencies, they're huge physical waves, and so you want to have them just tightened up a little bit, so that it doesn't. It's like a dynamic range kind of thing. You don't need the bass to be like as dynamic as maybe the mid range. And then I added an EQ from there, and that's just all. It's cutting, but it's dipping around like 140 hertz, just to take out some of those little peaks. Now, I mentioned earlier there's another Filter Freak on here, and what that does is on the breakdown it comes in. So it's a much slower sweep, and again, it's a preset I started with, but the distortion on it as well is part of that. So it has a different character to the distortion. And it goes back to that theory of just having the same sound transform over time. So when that comes in, because it's kind of a harder cut, it signals to the listener like, okay, the breakdown is here. From there, I have the Kramer, and the Kramer is another plugin I use pretty much on every mix, because it's modeled after analog circuitry, and so when you boost certain frequencies, it just gives it a really nice tone, and it cuts through really nice. So that's not doing a whole lot. It's just adding a little more character. And then another Tokyo Nova. And this one is something I probably could have just added this parameter to the previous Nova that I had, but my sound design process is somewhat of like a freestyle, in the sense of I'll just add things and see if it sounds good. So this was something I threw on, and it just added a little bit, and I liked it, so I figured why not just keep it on there, because I didn't want to like lose that creative flow, right? So then from there, there's a little more compression going on, and really this is almost like a little bit of a limiter, because the ratio is much higher, but it's the threshold's not doing much. So it's just containing some of those peaks. And then the last part would be Tokyo Nova, a little bit, yeah. And yeah, that's every factor that went on to decide to cut out. Let me that was the foundation for the bass. And so once I had that down, I actually printed it, partially to save CPU, because I'm running an older version of Pro Tools and my computer doesn't always like to play nice with me. So let's go ahead and bring in the committed version of that. And another reason I committed it is not only so I can further do processing, but I'm really into making edits that allow the sound to talk to you. So the verify feature in Pro Tools, which would be through Audio Suite, and that would be pitch shift verify. It's kind of like gross beats in FL Studio. And so I'll use that, and like if we go to another part, like I'll sometimes reverse certain sections, just ways to have that sound. It's think of it as like automation. It's an edit that is further melting certain segments of the sound or whatnot. But let's go ahead and hear what I have going on. So a couple things, right? The sends are now active. So it's going to a delay, a little bit of distortion, and then a very massive reverb. And the distortion is not doing a whole lot. It's a lot of my sound design process is like very intentional little changes. And then the delay in this instance would be, yeah, so I always when I'm doing delays, I always cut out the lows, or really even some of the mids, because you don't need them there. It's the delays are what you're going to hear those on the higher frequencies anyways. And then the tape echo. And it's really just at the default setting with a lot of feedback and the mix up quite a bit, as well as a tiny bit of stereo processing, and then the Kramer, just to boost a little bit of the top. But the Sci-Fi plugin is something I use quite a bit as well, because it's kind of like an LFO. So it's not doing much, but what it's doing, it's giving like a fluttering effect. And then from there, I just have a little bit of EQ, but really all that's doing is it's a sweep. It's like a filter sweep. So then from there, I added another Nova. I mean, this is like something this is like my go-to. And it's just compressing some of those frequencies as well as cutting. And I cut quite a bit of the lows out also, because since I was doing some analog distortion, it kind of, brings back in some of those low frequencies. So I wasn't too concerned. And then just some further dips for the mix. And same, I think I even like double dipped that frequency range, but it was pretty harsh. And then now, some more compression, and kind of the opposite of the compression I had previously, in the sense that the threshold is a little more, but the ratio is a lot less. So it's very light compression. And then again, just a little boost in the mid range, but not much. I mean, that's only at 1. And then a little bit of EQ, but again, it's only boosting a very subtle amount. Another Nova, doing just some very light compression on that specific frequency. And then the lo-fi. So this is another way I got the bass to talk. Is let's see where that comes in. Lo-fi sample rate. Yeah. So right here, for example, you'll see it'll come in. So it gives that, it's like a bit crusher, essentially. So it's just automating, and it allows it to continue to develop. Yeah, and from there, then all I did, after I make this inactive, and then from there, all I did was I printed it out one more time, so that when I took it to the studio, I didn't have to like, I could stick with what I had and then just mix and build upon what I already was working with. So yeah, I mean that really is the main part of the track. Um, from there, it's really just a little bit of a riser that comes in. And then the last bit would be another sound effect with just a little bit of delay and reverb. And I think there was one, I think it was one of these sound effects I pitched down. I think on the second one I pitched it a little bit. But overall, that is the track. It's a very simple arrangement and very simple core elements that are just being very intentionally tweaked. So that's something I will say to producers that are trying to find their own sound, is just stick with what you know and stick with what you personally think sounds good, because I've said before, music, it's just a feeling. So if it feels good to you, there's no reason to fight that. Thank you for checking out today's video. Be sure to like if you enjoyed this, hit the subscribe button. Hit me on Twitter at @tapnewo. Hit me on Instagram at @tapnewotechno. And I hope you guys all have a good rest of your day. Thank you.